Viktor, the glass shard dinner. The letter was yellow with age, addressed in block capitals to no one and everyone. The truth. Inside it, a confession that would shatter 3 decades of lies. But before Viktor opened it, before the roof collapsed beneath him and the truck roared away, there was the dinner. There was always the dinner first. 13 hours earlier, motor oil lived in Viktor's fingertips. No amount of scrubbing could remove it completely. It had burrowed into the cuticles, stained the crescents of his nails a permanent dark gray. He sat at the mahogany table, light from the overhead chandelier, catching the oil trapped beneath his skin, making his hands look diseased. The silver fork felt foreign in his grip. He stabbed the roast beef with more force than necessary. The meat tore apart under the pressure, fibers separating, blood pooling on the white porcelain. Rain hammered the windows. The dining room smelled of rosemary and something else. Something bitter and electric. Like a storm was happening inside the house itself. Across from him, Arthur watched. Their father. 68 years old with eyes like cold flint, the kind of stare that had perfected the art of contempt over decades. His silver hair was slicked back with pomade. A small scar twisted the corner of his mouth when he spoke, giving his words a perpetual sneer. "Still at the garage, Viktor." Arthur's voice cut through the clink of silverware. 32 and still wiping grease for a living. The fork stopped. A long moment. Then, nothing. Viktor said nothing. He returned to the meat, but his knuckles were white on the handle now, the tendons in his forearm tight as cables. Elena sat perfectly upright to his left, his older sister, the golden child. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse, and every line of her posture was geometry, angles, and precision. Her dark hair fell in calculated waves. A linen napkin rested in her lap. She reached up now, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a delicate fabric, her eyes never meeting Viktor's. Her wine glass reflected the chandelier light, fractured into 1,000 points of red. She didn't look at him. She never did when Arthur was in the room. "It's honest work," Viktor heard himself say. His voice sounded like gravel, like something from the bottom of a quarry. Arthur smiled. That scar twisted further. Honest. He tasted the word like it was spoiled. "Your mother's family was honest. Look where it got them. Look where you've landed." Viktor's head snapped up. The fork was still in his hand. He stared at his father for a breath, one breath, and then he slammed his palm onto the mahogany table. The contact was loud, a percussion that seemed to echo off every wall. The wine glasses jumped. One trembled on the edge of its base. A splash of red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, spreading like a bloodstain, like an accusation, like the truth finally breaking through. Arthur was standing before Viktor's hand had even come to rest. His chair skidded backward, the wood scraping a harsh path across the hardwood, and then it toppled. A heavy, final sound that meant something had broken. Arthur lunged across the table, his hand closing on Viktor's collar, the fabric of his flannel shirt twisting under fingers that had spent a lifetime gripping, controlling, crushing. Veins bulged in Arthur's neck. They pulsed with a sickening rhythm. "Don't you dare bring that trash behavior to this table." The roar of it. The way it filled the room and pushed out all the air. Viktor pushed back. His chair legs shrieked against the floor, a sound like something dying, and he yanked himself free from his father's grip with such violence that his forearm caught the wine glass. It was still half full, that blood-red liquid. The glass caught the edge of the table as he jerked away, and the world seemed to pause, to hold its breath, before the destruction came. Shattering. Crystal breaking into 1,000 pieces, each one glittering as it fell. The sound was clean and bright and final, A shard caught his knuckle. He felt it cut. Sharp, immediate, hot. A thin line of red appeared on his skin, beating up like a promise. Viktor looked down at his hand, at the oil and the blood mixed together, at the glass glinting on the tablecloth. Elena hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands folded, her face a mask that had been trained since childhood, never to crack. The study was on the second floor. Their mother's study. She had been dead for 3 years now. A stroke, sudden and clean. The room had been locked since the funeral. No one was supposed to go in there. The dust had settled over her desk, her books, her fountain pens. The keys to the room had disappeared. Except they hadn't. Elena had one. Viktor stood in the darkened hallway, a paper towel pressed against his bleeding knuckle. Through the sliver of the study door, he could see his sister moving. She was careful with her steps, careful with her movements. But there was something frantic about it, too. The careful movements of someone in a panic, someone with something to hide. He watched through the opening. He was a shadow. He was invisible. Elena reached into her silk waistband. The motion was practiced, fluid, but her hands trembled when the envelope emerged. It was yellowed with age, worn at the edges. The kind of envelope that had been hidden for a long time, pressed against skin, kept close like a secret that could physically hurt you. She stared at it. Her chest rose and fell. For a moment, her perfect mask cracked. Just for a moment. And Viktor saw something else underneath. Fear. Revulsion. A loathing so deep it twisted her features. The brass key appeared in her palm. It had been there all along, hidden in her closed fist. She moved to the roll-top desk, their mother's desk, the one with the dark wood and the brass handles worn smooth by years of handling. And she inserted the key into the bottom drawer with a precision that suggested she had done this before. Many times. The lock clicked open. A soft sound. The drawer groaned as it slid out, the wood scraping against the track. Viktor leaned forward. The envelope was visible now, and the handwriting on it was clear even in the dim hallway light. The script was his father's. Block capitals. Large and commanding. The truth. Elena slipped the envelope under a stack of old ledger books. Leather bound, heavy with years. She pushed the drawer shut. The lock clicked again. Then she stood there, her shoulders sagging, and Viktor watched as his perfect older sister, the golden child, the star, the one who had always done everything right, looked like she might break apart. 2 a.m. The house was silent, except for the rain. Viktor had waited until the hallway was clear, until even the sound of his parents breathing from their separate bedrooms had faded. He had a screwdriver from the truck. It was thin and old and perfect for work it was never designed for. The lock on the desk drawer was old too. That helped. He inserted the screwdriver into the lock and applied pressure. His shoulder muscles tensed. The metal groaned against the wood, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the dead of night. His teeth gritted. Sweat slicked his palms. He applied more pressure and the screwdriver slipped, gouging a deep scratch into the oak. The wood splintered around the damage, ugly and raw. The lock snapped. Viktor pulled the drawer open. It came fast, too fast, and nearly hit him as it emerged. He tossed the ledgers aside. They fell to the floor with heavy thuds that made him freeze, listening. Nothing. Just the rain and his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. The yellow envelope was there. He grabbed it. He ripped it open. Inside was a single sheet of school letterhead, the logo of Lincoln High School printed at the top in faded blue ink. Below it, a handwritten note. His father's script again. The words jumped out at him. Expunge record. Elena's academic reputation. Both phrases underlined twice. Heavy black marks that looked like fury. Viktor's hands shook as he read the rest of the letter. His eyes moved across the words, but the meaning took time to sink in, like watching someone drown in slow motion. Arthur had written to a judge. A personal plea. He was requesting the complete erasure of a record that was Elena's. There was more. There was always more. A floorboard creaked outside the door. Viktor's head snapped toward the hallway. A shadow stretched across the threshold, growing longer and wider as something approached. The darkness became a shape. The shape became a threat. Someone was coming. The figure burst through the door like a weapon. A dark hoodie, the face obscured, the body moving with the kind of violence that suggests training, or at least desperation. The shoulder check came fast. Viktor was driven backward into the bookshelves, and suddenly the world was nothing but pain and falling books and the suffocation of dust. Pages everywhere. Leather spines. The smell of old paper and mildew. He pushed back against the figure, trying to create space, trying to breathe, and they tumbled out of the study and into the hallway. A small side table was there, delicate, decorative, with no business being in a hallway where violence happens. The figure grabbed Viktor's wrist, twisting it to force the letter out of his hand. Viktor grunted, driving a knee forward. The figure twisted away, but not fast enough. The impact caught their hip and they both went down, crashing into the table. The vase that sat on top exploded into ceramic shards. The sound was bright and sharp and final. Viktor got a hand on the figure's hood and pulled it back. Long blonde hair spilled out, a face he knew. Blue eyes, wide and panicked. And for a moment he saw his sister, the real one, underneath the gilded exterior. And then she clawed at his face, her nails leaving 3 red welts that burned like fire. It was Elena. She stood up, smoothing her hair with violent, jerky motions. The silk blouse was torn at the shoulder. A line of blood ran down her throat from where something had caught her. Maybe the table, maybe Viktor's ring. She wasn't the golden child anymore. Her face was twisted into something cold and calculating. A predator's face. She pointed at the letter in his hand. "Give it to me, Viktor." Her voice was different now, hissing, soft, and somehow more terrifying than Arthur's roar. "You were always the family's mistake. Don't make me prove it again." Viktor backed away. The letter was still in his hand. His eyes dropped to it, and he saw the timestamp on the letterhead. The date made everything stop. It was dated the day after the high school fire. The fire that had destroyed the West Wing and nearly killed 3 people. The fire that Viktor had been blamed for. The fire for which he had been convicted and then, years later, had that conviction quietly removed from the record. An erasure he never understood. A favor from someone with enough power to make legal systems bend. He looked at his sister. In that moment, the pieces assembled themselves into a picture he didn't want to see. Arthur's bedroom door swung open. He stood there in a dark robe, gripping a heavy mahogany walking stick. The silver handle glinted in the hallway light, a gleam of wealth and authority. He didn't look at Elena's disheveled state. He didn't look at the torn blouse or the blood or the broken table. He locked onto Viktor and only Viktor. His eyes were blank, empty. The eyes of a man who had already made a decision and would not be moved from it. "What have you done to your sister, you animal?" The voice was booming, disgusted. The kind of voice that had spent decades shaping outcomes through force of will alone. Viktor held the letter up. He started to speak, to explain what it contained, what it meant, what the real story was. but Arthur raised the cane. The silver handle came up like a weapon, like the point of an argument that would be settled through violence, not reason. It was inches from Viktor's nose now, and Viktor could see his own reflection in the metal. Distorted, small, insignificant. Arthur's face was a mask of pure denial. The attic stairs were narrow and steep. Viktor's boots thundered on the wood as he took them 3 at a time. Behind him, the sound of pursuit. Arthur's cane thumping rhythmically, a metronomic reminder of consequences. Elena's footsteps, frantic and fast. The attic door was at the top. Viktor pushed through it and looked around. Dust, boxes, the remnants of a family's collected history, stacked haphazardly in the shadows. A single window, small and grimy, let in a sliver of moonlight. Arthur reached the top. The cane swung through the air like a club, and the motion was efficient. The motion of someone who had used violence before and would use it again. The lamp next to where Viktor was scrambling exploded. Ceramic, metal, light bursting outward, shards of both glittering as they fell. The bulb sparked, casting the attic into strobe light confusion, illumination and darkness alternating so fast it became disorienting. Viktor moved. Pure animal response. He was behind a stack of old trunks now, leather, heavy, the kind that held decades of accumulation. He kicked one. It slid across the floor in a heavy, inexorable movement, driven by desperation. The trunk struck Arthur's shins and Arthur stumbled, his weight shifting, his balance betraying him. He let out a roar that seemed to shake the rafters. Pain, fury, the sound of a man whose authority was being challenged. Viktor fumbled with the letter. His fingers shook as he opened it. He had only seen the first page in the study. Now there was a second page. New words. Worse words. Elena admitted the gasoline was hers. His eyes moved across the text. We must redirect the blame to Viktor. He is already a lost cause. Protect the star. The wind howled outside the attic vents. It was the only sound for a moment. The wind and Viktor's breathing, harsh and ragged. Elena appeared in the attic doorway. She was holding a heavy iron fireplace poker. It was long and sharp at one end, and her shadow against the rafters was massive, monstrous. The shadow of something capable of violence. You weren't supposed to see that page. Her voice was monotone, clinical, terrifying in its evenness. Now you're leaving me no choice. Arthur stepped up beside her. His robe hung open now, revealing pajamas underneath. The pajamas of a man interrupted mid-sleep, yanked from dreams to defend his preferred child. He nodded at Elena. The gesture was clear and specific. Not a command exactly, but a permission, a sanction. He put a hand on her shoulder in support, and in that touch, Viktor saw the entire structure of the family. The alliance, the preference, the way some children were protected, while others were sacrificed to the convenience of the family's narrative. Viktor was backed against the small attic window now. Glass panes behind him, cold and thin. Rain hammered against them from outside. He held the letter in one hand, but it didn't matter now. It didn't matter because there was no way out that didn't go through them, and they had already decided what they would do. Above him, the central beam of the attic, iron, old, supporting everything. And hanging from it, a pulley, rusted, ancient. The kind of mechanism that had been used for decades to hoist heavy items up into the attic during the house's life. Viktor's hands had spent 32 years learning how things worked, how to fix them, how to manipulate them. He reached up for the pulley. His fingers closed on the cold metal of the chain. He located the locking pin, a simple iron rod that held the system in place. It would take pressure. It would take leverage. It would take the kind of knowledge that came from years of working with heavy hoists in the garage. He kicked the pin. The mechanism screamed, metal on metal. The sound was like violence being executed in the acoustic space of the attic. The heavy hook swung down with an acceleration that seemed impossible, and it caught Elena's poker mid-swing. The impact tore the weapon from her hands and sent it clattering across the floor. Viktor didn't hesitate. He grabbed the chain and swung himself through the small attic window. The glass shattered outward. Cold rain hit his face. He rolled onto the wet shingles of the roof, the slate slippery beneath him, the edge of the roof 20 feet away in the darkness. Below, the sound of Arthur and Elena shouting, their voices hollow and distant and no longer threats. He had gotten out. He had gotten out. The next morning broke clear and bright. The rain had stopped. The sun came through the windows at an angle that made the dust visible, that made the destruction visible. The broken table, the spilled wine, the scattered books from the study. It looked like a crime scene or the aftermath of a storm. Arthur sat in the living room. He wore his business suit as if pretending that normalcy was possible. Elena sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She still wore the torn silk blouse. Her face was pale. There were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept. They were talking quietly when they heard the front door kick open. Viktor stood there, soaked from sleeping on the roof, his face cut and bloodied, but holding the letter high. The morning sun streamed in behind him, turning him into a dark, imposing silhouette, a weapon that had returned. Elena's coffee cup fell. It shattered on the rug. A brown stain spread across the fabric. She collapsed into a chair, and for the first time in Viktor's memory, the golden mask broke completely. The tears came fast and hot. Her shoulders shook. Her perfect composure dissolved into something raw and broken. I was just so scared. The words came between sobs. I couldn't be like you. They wouldn't have loved me. Arthur turned away. He couldn't look at either of them, his eyes fixed on a framed portrait on the mantel. The family together, smiling, a lie in a gilded frame. A memento of something that had never been true. Viktor walked over and slammed the letter onto the mantel. The sound was loud, final. The framed photo toppled forward, its face now to the wall, no longer visible. The driveway was gravel. It crunched under Viktor's boots as he walked toward his truck. Beat up, reliable, the thing that had never betrayed him. He pulled his phone out as he walked. The screen showed a sent indicator next to an email address. Daily Chronicle editor. The subject line read, Evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and judicial corruption. He climbed into the truck. The engine turned over, a roar of metal and oil and combustion. Exhaust clouded around the vehicle. Through the rearview mirror, he could see the house growing smaller. Elena stood on the porch, a tiny figure in a torn silk blouse, silhouetted against the morning light. Viktor didn't look at her for long. He shifted the truck into drive, and the wheels began to move. The gravel sprayed behind him. He smiled then, a sharp, cold smile that contained no warmth, no victory, nothing except the simple acknowledgement that something had been finished. He tossed the original letter out the window as he drove. It fluttered into a puddle at the end of the driveway. The ink began to run immediately, the black letters bleeding into the mud, dissolving into the water. The letter disintegrated as the truck continued down the road, picking up speed, moving away from the house and everything inside it. The trees blurred past. The road ahead was empty and open. Behind him, nothing but dust and the fading sound of the engine.